Okay, now that you have a little understanding of the properties of water and our uses of water, we're going to talk about how water is recycled and how it impacts our world. So this actually has two targets, target 8 and 9. 8 is you will be able to explain and model how water is cycled on Earth. 9, you'll be able to describe how the lack or the abundance of water impact human civilizations and populations. So the first thing, and I have a printout of this water cycle that you can use and put in your notes, and or you can draw the water cycle in your notebook if you choose. It's up to you. We will come back. I'll come back to this picture in just a minute. But the first thing I want you to put down is what is the water cycle? It's a continuous cycle where water changes state and location around the earth. So this is where water is changing from a solid to a liquid to a gas, and we're moving that water around to different places on earth. Okay, the water cycle involves everything that contains water. So your oceans, lakes, river, the soil, groundwater, which is water located underneath the ground, plants and animals, we have water, glaciers and ice, and then the states of matter would be solid, liquid, and gas. I have gas twice, I don't know why. You don't have to write twice. Okay, so let's take a look at our water cycle. Okay, so the water cycle is just showing you all the different ways water is pushed around Earth and where it comes from. So we've got up here, we've got water that's stored in ice and snow. Okay, that can do a couple things. Sometimes it will evaporate and go into the atmosphere, but a lot of times it melts. And when it melts, we call that snow melt or runoff. It travels and it goes into streams. Okay? And then what you look down here, if you look down here, you have streams that are on the surface of the earth that carry water. Okay? Some of that water goes underneath the ground. It seeps into the soil, and you have groundwater. Okay? Groundwater can come up through a spring. Okay? Or can come back up through a freshwater storage like a lake or a pond. All right, and what you're noticing is just how water is cycled through. So liquid water, whether it's in a pond, a river, the groundwater, whether it's in plants or animals, will, through heat energy, will evaporate and turn into gas. So liquid water will change from a liquid to a gas. That liquid or that gas of water we call water vapor. It gets stored in our clouds. Water vapor kind of attaches itself to dust particles, pollen, small particles that are in our atmosphere, and that's what creates our clouds. So then you've got water vapor in our clouds, and then what happens with that is the water vapor in our clouds start to cool off, and then once they cool off, that water vapor, that gas, will turn back into a liquid, and it'll fall down in the form of some sort of precipitation, whether that's rain, snow, and it'll come back down to earth. Okay, so that's what this cycle is showing you. And remember, this cycle is a continuous process. There's no beginning or end to it. All the water that we have here on earth is all we're ever going to have. It just gets moved around and changes state. So water is a solid when it's in ice or snow, can change into a liquid when you add heat energy, and then that liquid is, whoops, I didn't mean to, whoa, sorry about that. I did not mean to draw that on there. Liquid in the form of, it could be in the ocean, rivers, ponds, groundwater, plants, animals. When plants have water on their leaves and that evaporates, that's actually called transpiration instead of evaporation. You see that right here. This diagram has evapotranspiration, but it's usually just transpiration. And then that could go, the water will turn from a liquid to a gas, which we'll call water vapor. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of how water is cycled through the earth. And again, you will have this, either you will need to draw the water cycle in your notes, or you can have the one that I have on this page. I have copies of that. Okay, so let's talk about why the water cycle is so important. Well, all organisms need water. And so the water needs to be clean and not polluted. You guys know, just for humans, we don't want to drink polluted water, we'll get sick. Well, all other organisms need clean water as well. So, since every living thing here on earth, and that's what an organism is, a living thing, needs water. That's the major importance of water. Life could not survive here on earth without liquid water. That's one of the reasons why our planet and our solar system is able to support life. We are the exact distance from our sun so that the solar radiation that our planet can support liquid water. Other planets, either closer to the sun or farther away, do not have liquid water because if they're too close, they're going to have water is going to evaporate and usually leave the planet. Or if they're too far away, it's going to be frozen. So that's one of the reasons why Earth is called the blue planet, because we are a certain distance from our star that allows us to support liquid water. Okay, so now let's talk about what happens when our water gets polluted. What are those sources of pollution? There are a lot of sources. So number 3, you're going to have a lot of notes on the sources of pollution. The largest source of pollution is sediments. Remember, sediments, through the process of weathering, which that weathering is any force like water, wind, ice, or gravity that breaks rocks into smaller pieces. Those are called sediments. This is the largest source of pollution. Those sediments, a river will always carry sediments to the ocean, but human activities increase the amount of sediments that get into our rivers. 25 billion tons of sediment are carried from farms to rivers. 50 billion tons from construction sites and clear forces. Sediments make the water cloudy and they block sunlight that plants need to photosynthesize. That's the process where plants can make their own food. So if we have a lot of sediment in our water, that's not going to make our rivers very healthy. Another source of pollution is agriculture. Farmers and owners apply pesticides to crops and lawns, and those chemicals get into our water supply. So if you think about it, if you spray pesticides on plants, that chemical will seep into the soil, into our groundwater. And remember, if we look at our picture back up here, that groundwater goes back into a spring or a stream or a fresh water storage like a lake or a pond. So that pollutes our water when that happens. Another source of pollution is human waste. So this can get into water supply, which can contain harmful organisms that make people sick. Okay, this can happen even though we do have water purification and filtration systems. Sometimes things can go wrong with that. Okay, another source of pollution is mining. Okay, especially up here in Colorado, especially when there was a lot of mining being done in Colorado, and there still is. Metals that can be poisonous are released into the water from mining, like arsenic. Okay, that can be released. A lot of sulfur can get released into our water supply. So those are some chemicals that from the metals that we mine for that we do not want to get into our water supply. And then we have air pollutants. So air pollutants can come from factories, cars, etc. And what happens is those air pollutants, which are mostly nitrates and carbon dioxide, they'll release toxic chemicals into the air. And those toxic chemicals will attach themselves to water molecules in the clouds. And that creates acid rain. So you're looking at sulfur oxides, carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxides. And basically, just so you kind of get an idea of what these are, sulfur is an element on the periodic table, so is oxygen. If you combine sulfur and oxygen together, we call those sulfur oxides. If you combine nitrogen and oxygen together, that's nitrogen oxides. And then carbon dioxide is carbon and two atoms of oxygen put together. So those are some chemicals that can get released from our factories and cars, and they'll attach themselves to water molecules in the atmosphere, and then that will come down with the water as acid rain. So these just give you some pictures of some of the pollution that we have that's polluting our water right now. See these signs, no dumping, drains to the ocean. We've got sediment being added a lot from the factories, from agriculture, a lot of human waste. So So let's talk about ways that we can help, because we want our water, we only have a certain amount of fresh water here on Earth. We're never going to have any more. So we've got to make sure that we take care of our water and that we can always use that water and make sure it's clean. So some ways that we can help make sure that we don't pollute our water. Treat water before it enters the stream, lake, or river to get rid of some of that sediment or any pollution. Some of the things that we can also do is we can create laws. Our government has approved the Water Pollution Control Act, which sets up guidelines on how we're supposed to keep our water clean. Same thing with the Safe Drinking Water Act. So there's some laws put in place that factories have to follow, that city governments and towns have to follow as far as drinking water is concerned. We need to start disposing of our waste properly. So that's the big 3 R's: reuse, recycle. We've got to make sure that we are recycling as much as possible. And the other big thing is conserving water. So a lot of times, think about when you brush your teeth. Do you leave the faucet on while you're brushing your teeth? You need to turn that off and only use it when you're actually rinsing. There's a lot of things that we can do to conserve our water. I know when it gets really hot in the summertime, people can only water their lawns a certain amount of times during the day or a certain amount per week so that we conserve our water that way. We also need to reduce emissions. So that's where, as a city, we need to start having more public transportation, more buses, start carpooling. Those are some ways that we can reduce emissions. Okay, so hopefully after listening to the section of notes, you've got a better idea of what the water cycle is and how, if we start polluting our water, what's going to happen to that. And you're going to do a lot of activities with what's going to happen if we start running out of water. How's that going to impact human civilization and populations.